This week is called Why Do We Shout to the People We Love? And next week is about realistic expectations, balancing expectations. So, why do we shout to people we love? Let's start at the beginning. We're living in unprecedented times. And I know that we all know that. And I know that we all hear that. And we're all familiar with that. But I think it's always important to lay out the groundwork. And these times that we're living in are exacerbated for all children, but particularly for adolescents. And I'm going to suggest there are 3 reasons why it's particularly difficult for adolescents. First and foremost is the fact that for adolescents, the peer environment is adolescent oxygen. Those of you who have been to my or attended my 3-part Zoom series on raising adolescents, we spend some time on this because in the adolescent years, children move from the environment that's their focus, being the family, the environment that's their focus is the peers and the social environment. And therefore, in a situation where that is compromised, we are literally starving them of oxygen. Now, I know, of course, they spend loads of time on their various devices and connecting and chatting and on Instagram and everything else, but it isn't the same as rubbing shoulders in the playground, of walking home together, of having lunch together. It just isn't the same. And therefore, we underestimated our peril, the degree to which adolescents are struggling in the current environment. And I'm not a therapist, I'm a rabbi and a teacher and a mentor of parents, but I'm in touch with parents every single day of the week. And more often than not, parents of teenagers. And teenagers are really, really struggling in the current environment. The schools are closed. You don't have the whole context of schooling. And that context of schooling is that peer environment. And that is the anchor of one's life in the adolescent years. Of course, in secondary school, there's exam pressure, school expectations. And I'm going to ask a question which you may view to be a bit controversial, but is the school being realistic? Whatever school, we've got a whole variety of schools over here. Is the school being realistic? You know, even the very best of schools, ultimately, the pastoral care in the school is there to support the academic machine. That's what the pastoral care is there for. In an excellent school, yes, there'll be excellent pastoral care. But in essence, the school is about creating results. It's about being able to move children through a process of exams. Hopefully, if the school has a broader environment, then it's also about developing them as a person. But ultimately, we wouldn't send our children to a school, certainly if we're focused on the academic achievements, if the academics weren't good. But at the moment, we are living in utterly unprecedented times. I'm by definition positive. I'm not a pessimist in the slightest. But I do feel there's one analogy which is unfortunately quite relevant. It's almost a bit like a war zone. We're fighting a battle against a disease, and everybody's trying to keep themselves safe. And therefore, we have to ask ourselves, what is realistic expectations at the moment? And are schools having realistic expectations? And we're going to come back to that much, much more next week, because I think it's vital that certainly we as parents have realistic expectations. And we'll come to why that's so essential. But because it may well be that we have to step in to create realistic expectations if the school is not doing so. And if the school is creating unrealistic expectations of our children, we have to ask ourselves, what is our role over here? So I'm raising that more as a question. This is not a comment about any particular school. Schools are doing their very, very best in very, very difficult circumstances. We may have some educators on the screen here as well. And I salute what schools are doing. And schools have got to do that because ultimately they've got to deliver. But we as parents have got to ask ourselves, what are realistic expectations in these current unprecedented environments? Of course, for all children, I put addiction in inverted commas because it's a very strong term. But certainly for teenagers particularly, screens are access to the world around us, and they are a relief from boredom. And therefore, it's no surprise, and I hear it every single day, that it's almost impossible to prize our children away from the screen. And that becomes a significant challenge. So whilst COVID is difficult for everybody, without question, and whilst we're all worn out by this 3rd lockdown, without question, and all the philosophy and all the philosophizing that accompanied the first lockdown, there's something I get out of the window, and I'm going to avoid almost all of that tonight because I want to be very pragmatic. In this 3rd lockdown, everybody's worn out. And yes, thank God the vaccine is on the way, and they're making progress. Still, there's uncertainties about the future, and that makes it all more difficult. We're facing a situation. A couple of weeks ago, we had a wonderful training session from Rabbi Jonathan Dove. And some of you may know, actually, I think Joanne is, I saw sneaking in here, Joanne, and checking up on me, my wonderful colleague.
Obviously, I'm checking up on you, Rabbi Herman, but you're doing very, very well. Don't worry, you're doing great.
Those who don't know Joanne, I'm sure you all know Joanne. Joanne is the most incredible, energetic colleague to have. I always love saying the line that technically I'm Joanne's line manager, but it's impossible to line manage someone that you cannot keep up with in terms of her productivity. So thank you, Joanne. We had a wonderful, wonderful training session from Rabbi Jonathan Job, Joanne's husband, and the Lily project, and about mental health. And he said a very, very kind of clear analysis of the current situation. Current situation is both acute and chronic. It's difficult enough when life throws at us an acute situation. It's hard when it throws us as a chronic situation. When you have acute and chronic together, that's a very difficult mix. So we have to begin by understanding or accepting that which we all know and all feel, but I want to endorse it and I want to say it clearly. These are unprecedented times, and we're going to have to ask ourselves what is realistic for us as parents, realistic for our children. Now, in fact, I think we spend half the time urging them to get on the computer. You've got a lesson coming up. Get on the computer. You're going to be late for your lesson. There's a Zoom class coming up. And then we spend the rest of the half time urging them to get off the computer. Come on, get some exercise. Get out. You're spending too much time on the screen. And our poor adolescents don't really know where they're coming or going. Now, let us begin with a wonderful definition of anger. Because tonight is about why do we shout at the people we love? Why do we shout at people we love? So I want to give you a classic Torah definition of anger. Sorry, got that wrong. Classic Torah definition of anger. And the source for this is sourced from one of the great Torah thinkers, but it's a wonderful definition. Anger is the emotion we feel when our expectation of the world clashes with reality. Anger is the emotion we feel when our expectation of the world clashes with reality. By the way, anybody who wants the PowerPoint afterwards is welcome to it. Now, so we have a particular expectation. Let's take a simple example. You get in the car and you're expecting to drive to the shops, or you're expecting to drive to school. And there's somebody who's double parked in the middle of the road. It seems like a car stalled in the middle of the road. Now, my expectation was that the road would be clear, that I left enough time, and that they could get in. I could drive through. But so for a few minutes, what happens is I stand there and I listen to the radio, and for 30 seconds, I'm fine with it. Then I notice what's happening is actually two people are having a conversation. The driver of the car in the middle of the road and the driver of the car on the side of the road. Now that's when I begin to feel a certain degree of frustration, which builds up into anger because I had an expectation. And I give a bit of a toot on my horn, and the driver in front gives me a little cheery wave, motions with his fingers. Just be a minute. I think this is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, for goodness sake, I'm in a hurry. I expected the road to be clear. What's this sugar doing in the middle of the road, conducting a conversation when there's things to do? And that builds up and builds up and builds up. In worst case scenario, they have an explosion of anger. What are you doing? You're crazy. I had a certain expectation of the world which clashed with my reality. If we ask ourselves every time we get angry, if we were to stop and ask ourselves, why did I get angry? 9 times out of 10, you're going to start with a sentence, because I thought that. I expected that. What I thought was going to happen that. Anger is the emotion we feel when our expectation of the world clashes with reality. It's an extremely incisive definition of anger, which is going to be our segue into this whole topic. So, and once I recognize that, that's going to at least enable me to diagnose and to begin to deal with some of the situations. But why is it that we particularly get frustrated with the people that we love? By the way, I'm going to talk for about half an hour and then open it out to the floor. Why do we shout at the people we love? It seems so counterintuitive. I know that here we're dealing with older children, but I remember sometimes, as a little, when our children are little and they're young and they're small and they're maybe 4 or 5 years old and they do something which we get upset about. And then, of course, they move on quite quickly. We spend the rest of the day feeling absolutely rubbish. We got upset with them. And then later on in the evening, we sit on their beds and we say to them, darling, do you remember that I got a bit upset with you this morning? The child looks at me with bewildered eyes, completely forgotten all about it. And suddenly it comes back to them. And you say, do you know why I got upset with you? Because I love you. The child thinks, this doesn't quite make sense anymore. You see, when we love someone, The truth is that I'm going to suggest there are two triggers for anger. We're going to deal with one tonight. This is actually an extract from a series that we run called, a whole three-part series called Why Do We Shout at People We Love, which is looking at anger from a Torah perspective. This is an extract. I want to look at one trigger. One trigger, believe it or not, is because we care so much. In the Hebrew, the word for love is ahava. Every letter in Hebrew has a numerical value. You can see that there. Aleph is 1, Hey is 5, Bet is 2, and Hey is 5, adding up to 13. Fascinating in Hebrew, which is a beautiful language from Hashem, 13 is exactly the same numerical value as the word one. When we love, we feel at one with someone else. When we give, we feel at one with someone else. Our identity is tied up with them. Now, that is absolutely vital to understand why it is that we get so upset with people that we love. As I said, there are two triggers for it. I want to focus tonight on one trigger. And this is that one trigger. It's because we are so emotionally invested in them that we feel so strongly for them and about them that means that actually our expectations are raised. If our definition of anger is that gap between reality and expectation, when we love someone, we have greater expectations. When we love someone, our level of care is so much more dramatic, if you like. When we love someone, we want for them in a way that is much more significant than we would want for someone else. I'll give you an example. Let's imagine you have, in the days before COVID, a friend of your teenager who comes around to do homework with them, or spend the evening with them. And you notice that actually the other boy or girl is not getting on with their homework at all. Now, you might give it a bit of a nudge if you're particularly conscientious. I thought you were going to do some homework together. But it's not really going to trouble most of us that much, right? I mean, it would be great if it did, but it's not going to trouble most of us that much. But if it's our own child, son or daughter, doesn't do the homework, and it's an important piece of work, then we're going to feel this whole powerful sense of emotion. Why is that? Because we've invested in that person. We've invested emotionally. We care for them, we identify with them, and we want for them what we want for ourselves, the very, very, very best. Now, and that is why when it's someone that we love, then our expectations are raised. Not just our expectations of them, but our expectations for them. And that's a very important distinction. It's really our expectations for them that creates our expectations of them. And that's why when it goes wrong, when there is this clash, when there is this collapse, when it doesn't match our expectations, we feel this great sense of anger. The world's not operating as I want it to operate. And here it's not just something neutral, somebody parked on the road, it's where it means the very most to me, for my children, the person that I love, for my spouse, for my brother, for my sister, wherever it is, someone I care for. If they're not operating the way things should be operating, then I feel it as though it's my own world that is collapsing, my own world that's falling apart. That is very, very important. I'm going to say a couple of things tonight, which you may not agree with, but I'm going to say them because, you know, those of you who have heard me before as a teacher, I only share that which I firmly believe in, and that which I'm working on myself and work with. So I'm going to raise a couple of questions which are designed to help us think. Do we sometimes or in the moment want too much? I don't mean too much in terms of quantity. I mean too much in terms of our emotional investment. In other words, are we emotionally invested in the right areas, in the right priorities at the moment? Or, and we're going to address this partly tonight and partly next week, maybe we're actually emotionally invested in areas which are not priority at the moment, or better still, cannot be priority at the moment. And that's a very important question, which I'm going to leave as an open-ended question, and we'll come back to it, but as an open-ended question. When I want so much, and it's not working, and I'm not getting anywhere, and all that's happening is tension and clashes, am I overly invested in a particular area? And is that sensible in the current climate, in the current environment? Does that need recalibrating? Does that need rethinking of that? Now, as parents, we have incredible challenges at the moment. I'm sure I haven't listed all of them, but many parents are homeschooling. And let's be honest, you know, being a teacher is a skill. I have to say that I have never taught formally in a classroom. I basically am a madrich that forgot to grow up till somebody paid me for it. But homeschooling is very difficult. Juggling work. Many of us are trying to work and juggle homeschooling, keeping up with our own profession as much as we can. And as much as we might love each other, we're not normally all cooped up in the same place for an indefinite number of hours. Certainly, for many parents, you're juggling competing needs. A spouse needs this, a child needs this. Maybe there's a parent that you can't see that needs something else. Maybe there's a neighbor, apart from our own particular needs. Then, of course, we have accentuated parental duties. In other words, parents are dealing with absolutely abnormal circumstances in which normal parenting is challenging enough, but accentuated parenting is much more difficult, especially when we have to deal with managing emotional well-being. We've got to be there to listen to our children, as we'll talk about next week. We've got to be able to empathize, even if we ourselves are struggling. They need us to help them through emotionally. So the whole gamut of challenges is enormous. And I know this won't be new to anybody, but I wanted to put it down on one page because it's so important if we're going to ask ourselves what are realistic expectations, that we have clarity in terms of the enormity of the task that we face. Now, and it's so important. Now, when we talk about this idea that when I love somebody else, I identify with them, there's an absolutely beautiful vignette of one of the great sages of the 20th century, Rabbi Levine. There's a book written about him called A Tzaddik in Our Time, A Righteous Man in Our Time. And Rabbi Levine, so he lived in Jerusalem. As it happens, my great-grandfather knew him quite well. Some of you may have heard his son. He's a great presenter. Benjamin Levine is his grandson. Benjamin Levine. Rabbi Levine was a real pious individual. And he lived in Jerusalem, taught in the yeshiva in Jerusalem. And there's a famous vignette about him. That he once went to the doctor with his wife, and his wife had a problem with her foot. And when they sat down in front of the doctor said, Rabbi Ari Levine said to the doctor, "My wife's foot is hurting us. My wife's foot is hurting us." He wasn't being pretentious in any respect. He was expressing what love should be. Such a sense of identity that their pain is my pain. Their struggle is my struggle. Their failure feels like my failure. And that is why when we're living in such close proximity, constantly with somebody that we love, then our expectations for them and of them are raised considerably. No surprise that we snap. No surprise that we are constantly confronting that clash between the reality and that expectation, especially in the environment in which we're currently living, where our own challenges are so enormous. So let's what have I done here? Yeah. I want to share with you something that Rabbi Dov shared with us. I shared with his permission, which I found was very, very powerful model. We had some training for our whole team a couple of weeks ago about recognizing issues in mental health with the families that we care for, and also actually it was quite important about in our own lives, the stresses of life. And there was this very, very, I thought, very clever but very simple analogy of what stress is. Water tank analogy for stress, vulnerability, and coping. Water tank represents our vulnerability, arising from our genetic makeup and the effects of nurture. The water level represents the stress level. Some people have bigger tanks than others and can hold more water, stress, before overflowing or feeling overwhelmed. The inflow pipe represents external stresses which are often beyond our control. Where there are a lot of stresses at once, we become overwhelmed, filling the water tank very fast, leading to high stress levels. At other times, the stress is manageable. When we are not really affected, we are coping and functioning normally. So you can see over here, to the right-hand side, I just think it's a very clever and simple analogy. The water representing the rising stress levels and the outside stresses that we simply can't control, whether it's a COVID environment, whether it's unexpected tax bill, whether it's issues at work, or whether it's maybe someone that we know and care for that's not well, or whether it's sometimes challenging teenagers. There are many stresses that are actually beyond our control. So here what's important is we need to have an outflow pipe. The outflow pipe represents its protective factors. healthy coping skills, good self-care, strong social support. Those with good protective factors outflow can manage the water stress levels in the tank, even when the outside stress is rapid and unpredictable. Those with smaller tanks are more prone to overflow and be overwhelmed. So extremely, extremely, extremely important. And that's why, by the way, the sequence of these talks was first focused on us as parents and how we are coping. You know, the Torah tells us that even when it comes to life-threatening situations, one's own life comes first. And the analogy often given is that if one's in an aeroplane and God forbid there's a need for the oxygen masks, the instructions always are, please place your oxygen mask on yourself first before you help others. If we are not looking after ourselves, it's very difficult to look after others. So it is vital that we have ways to look after ourselves, which is difficult at the moment, very difficult at the moment, because the inflow pipe is extremely active and presenting us with a constant flow of unpredictable and difficult situations. So first of all, I found this model very, very good to recognize when it comes to a point in time when, you know what, I feel my water's overflowing. I actually feel I need to take a break. I need to go for a walk. I need to do some exercise. I need to listen to music. I need to read something, but I actually need to take a break. And to recognize when we need to take a break and to say, I'm doing this not just for myself. I'm doing this because I want to be able to manage better with everybody else. If I'm not coping as a parent, it's difficult for everybody else to cope. Now, but of course, it's natural that in this current situation, sometimes we're not coping. And sometimes we need to go for extra help to cope. But to neglect ourselves is a mistake. That's very, very important. It's not a mitzvah, it's a mistake. It's not selfless behavior, it's actually misguided behavior. Now, so then what is the approach? We've said that anger is that gap between reality and expectation. What happens if we cannot change the situation? Then we have to look at ways in which we can maybe adjust our expectations. So this is the Serenity Prayer, famous by the Alcoholics Anonymous. It's an absolutely beautiful prayer, which is really worthwhile having on one's fridge. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's beautifully expressed. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Many, many, many years ago, someone came to see me. I don't remember the person's name, no compromise on confidentiality. It was well over 10, 15 years ago. They had a parent, a much older parent, who was very, what's the word? That lovely word for cantankerous. Cantankerous. Old enough to be cantankerous and no longer to care. As happens, they were also a very, very heavy smoker. And this person was really struggling with their cantankerous parent and was deeply frustrated with their parent. And as I said, I'm not a psychologist. I'm a teacher basing myself on Torah principles. But I suggested they did an exercise. They took a piece of paper and we drew a square in the middle of the piece of paper. And I said, and this piece of paper is about everything you would like to change in your relationship with your parent. But what goes inside the square is those things that you can change. What goes outside the square are those things that you would love to change, but cannot change. And a week later, we met again, and they'd done this exercise, and it was quite clear that an enormous amount of energy was being expended in the frustration of trying to change things that were absolutely not changeable. I don't remember how old the parent was, but you weren't going to stop them smoking now. They survived it all those years. Of course, not recommending it, but you weren't going to stop them. They had certain cantankerous habits, you weren't going to stop them. So we talked about, I don't want to give any more details, we talked about what could be changed, how one could change, but it's a great exercise to do. I've done it myself over the years in challenging situations because it forces us to confront, and therefore it forces us, or if you like, gives us a focus of where should I use my energy, where is it best expended, where am I actually utilizing energy and getting frustrated, where actually there's going to be no productive outcome. So I think it's a really important question to ask ourselves, and we're going to approach this more next week. What is our role as a parent in the current situation. There's no question about it. It is not a normal parenting role and cannot be a normal parenting role. And to have normal expectations of ourselves as parents would be unfair to ourselves, grossly unfair to ourselves. What is our role as a parent? And we listed all the challenges we face as parents and all the multiple obligations we have as parents. What is our role as parent in the current situation? And to say to ourselves, what's my predominant role, my priority role for myself as a parent in the current situation? I'm actually not going to suggest an answer to that tonight. We're going to look at that particularly next week. But I really want to raise the question tonight because I think it's a very important for us to question for us to focus on. Because I feel that it's vital that we have realistic expectations of ourselves. Otherwise, we set ourselves up to fail and we literally create a situation where anger is inevitable on a daily basis. Anger with others and actually anger with ourselves. Disappointment with others and disappointment with ourselves. Whereas we may actually be doing an excellent job in the current circumstances because we have to redefine what excellence is in the current circumstances. And I'd be very happy to maybe on the chat maybe or later on in Q&A in a few minutes, what is excellence in the current circumstances? I'm going to give my own presentation of it next week, but I deliberately didn't want to give it straight away because I think it's so important that we think about it. What is excellence in the current circumstances and what is simply unrealistic, and to adjust expectations accordingly. And I want to suggest three, as I said, this is really an extract from a three-part series on the whole Torah approach to handling anger. It's very interesting, but the Torah has four categories of people that get angry. In Pirkei Avot, those who are fast to get angry and fast to calm down. Those are fast to get angry and slow to calm down. Those are slow to get angry, but slow to calm down. Those are slow to get angry and fast to calm down. Now, we could give a whole cheer on those. I'm just going to repeat them once more because I wonder if anyone can suggest a missing one. Four categories of typed anger types. Those who are fast to get angry and slow to calm down. Right? That's the worst of both worlds. Fast to get angry, slow to calm down. Then those who are fast to get angry, but fast to calm down. They may flare up quickly, but they calm down quickly. Okay? Arguably, although it's a debate, not as bad. Those who are slow to get angry, but slow to calm down. They don't get angry very often, but when they do, oh boy, do they stew. And the best category, person who's slow to get angry and fast to calm down. Is there one missing? Anyone suggest there's one missing? You can unmute yourself if you'd like to suggest one missing. Well, anybody?
Who doesn't get angry?
That's right. One who doesn't get angry at all. And one of the classic commentaries on Pirkei Avot and Ethics of the Fathers says, no, that's not what that one's not in there, because most people get angry every so often. Most people. I do know one or two people. I have a very, very good friend who never gets angry. Got to tell you, he infuriates me, but he never gets angry. Right? Just never gets angry. Not part of his temperament. But most of us, will struggle with this and have to work on this and grow in this area and learn to take control in this area. And it's interesting that Pirkei Avot does not list that one who never gets angry. In fact, the commentary says because the Torah wasn't given to angels. Even Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest of all human beings and greatest leaders, the Torah tells us, although it can't be taken in its absolute literal sense, there were several occasions in the Torah says that Moshe Rabbeinu got angry, he got upset with Klal Yisrael. Doesn't mean that he stormed off in a rage, but at his level, he got angry with Klal Yisrael. In fact, we're told that when he got angry on one occasion, he lost clarity of thinking. The Gemara in Pesachim, he lost clarity of thinking, and the halacha, which needed to be stated at the time, he couldn't state because he's lost that clarity. I want to give you a kind of almost a first aid guide, an extract from our longer course to handling anger. And the first one is, I don't know if I'm doing a bit of an advert here. I do a WhatsApp parenting, 90-second parenting, approximately once a month. There's one due out this week, approximately once a month. And you may be of interest to you. If it's of interest, then I can let you know how to access that. But it's a 90-second parenting. And a couple of times ago, I did something called the emergency stop. And again, I only share that which I believe to be highly practical, and that which can be implemented. In other words, as follows. In driving, we are all trained to make an emergency stop. God forbid somebody walks out into the road in the middle of, whilst you're driving along, we slam our foot on the brakes. We have the capacity to make that emergency stop. We don't think, we just do. And when we feel a surge of anger, when we feel that frustration, when we feel that irritation, the first thing to do is metaphorically slam our foot on the brakes. Stop. Stop. Before we verbally run over our child or our spouse by saying things we shouldn't say. Literally think of it like an emergency stop and simply stop. Don't react at all. That is stage one. And that can be very effective. There's a, what's her name? Sarah Radcliffe, psychologist, psychotherapist, a very expert, a great parenting expert, writes regularly in one of the Jewish magazines, written several books, a big fan of hers. She actually suggests that one can actually do something almost physiological. So she suggests that you press your lips together. What that does is, and she explains, that it interrupts the neurological pathways. So whilst we're almost on a path to get angry, when we do something physically, it interrupts the neurological pathways. And it's almost like a circuit breaker, which stops us in our tracks. And this is a very, very useful technique, for what's the best word? I prefer the word skill. A very useful skill to learn and to practice, literally to stop. Stage two, here you see, again, the beauty of the Hebrew language. The word in Hebrew for patience is savlanut. Savlanut is patience. The root of that word is saval. Saval, we actually find it in reference to the coming out of Egypt. Saval means pain. Now remember, Hebrew is a God-given language. Classical Hebrew, Torah Hebrew is a God-given language. What could be the association between patience and pain? Because actually to be patient means to be able to sustain some pain, temporary pain. It's so difficult to be patient. It's so difficult to bite one's lip. It's so difficult to take that break. You actually have to be able to live with a certain amount of pain. You're bursting to react. You're bursting to respond, even if we know that that response will be negative and possibly even damaging. So step one is to stop. Step two is to wait. SWT, right? Almost a SWOT analysis. SWT is to wait. Maybe you say to those around you, you know what? I'm feeling angry and I need to take a 5-minute break. I need to get some fresh air. I need to go to another room. I need to take a 5-minute break. And literally, it's painful. To be patient is painful. To be patient, it means to be able to live with that temporary pain for a few minutes. But of course, the outcome of that is tremendous. When we control ourselves, when we introduce positivity into the house, it makes a tremendous difference. And T is to think. And we're going to spend more time on this next week. Those of you who have been on the 3-part course will be more familiar with this. But to think, in terms of my reaction now, and we're going to analyze this more. But for the moment, will the benefit outweigh the cost? Simple question. I'm about to respond. I'm about to lock antlers with my teenager. I'm about to take them to task. I'm about to impose a sanction. Will the benefit outweigh the cost? I'm about to make a demand. Is it going to happen, or are they going to shrug their shoulders? Do I have the ability to carry it through? Will the benefit outweigh the cost? Because it's quite simple. If the benefit will not outweigh the cost, it's not worth doing. Now, maybe we'll talk next week about how to manage that, but will the benefit outweigh the cost? That's so, so, so important. So I've suggested a kind of instantaneous strategy. SWT, stop. Just train oneself to stop when you feel the surge, when you feel the frustration. Simply imagine you're in the car and you've slammed your foot on the brakes and you just stop. Then take a deep breath and take a break. Sustain the pain the patient takes. And maybe that's the time to say, I'm sorry, I need a few minutes to myself. And then think, when we've got that time to myself, what am I about to do? Am I about to verbally run over my child? Am I about to clash antlers and it's just not worth it? Knowing what they're going through and knowing how difficult it is for them as a teenager in general and in a specific situation. And besides, can I achieve what I want to achieve? Or is there going to be simply a fraying of the relationship? And therefore, the benefit will not outweigh the cost. That's a kind of instantaneous an emergency process for helping us manage some of those reactions. Now, before I kind of finish off, which I'm about to do, I want to kind of summarize where we've come from. We began by acknowledging that the situation we are in is utterly unprecedented. And to fail to acknowledge that means that we are going to set ourselves up with unrealistic expectations. I've raised several questions this evening, questions for consideration, which is in terms of our schools. Do the schools have realistic expectations or not? If, I'm going to say something which may be controversial, if our schools do not have realistic expectations, then we've got to help our child deal with that. We've got to help our child manage the unrealistic expectations or manage the fact that they're not going to meet all the school's expectations because they may be a higher priority in terms of their emotional well-being, which actually takes precedence in the current situation. Again, I'm not criticizing any school. Schools are doing their very, very best to try and handle the situation. They don't want children to lose out on their work. At the same time, I certainly feel that some of the schools are just not being realistic for a child to sit hour after hour after hour on Zoom without any of the proper context of a social interaction, which is without going into the playground, without having lunch together, without running around with friends, without playing a game of football. I just feel that some of the expectations that I've heard are just not realistic and not necessarily not realistic. So I'm not, you may not agree, and that doesn't take away from the fact, I'm going to say it for a third time, the schools are doing their very, very best. But we as parents have got to make sure that our children come through this as wholesome as they possibly can and come through this with a sense of well-being. So then we talked about identifying what is anger. Anger is that gap between reality and expectation. Anger is the gap between reality and expectation. Such an important and profound definition that Torah sources give us, because we have to ask ourselves now, what is my expectation and what is the reality? What is the gap between the two? And therefore, if I cannot change the reality, I'm going to have to adjust my expectations. Otherwise, I'm destined to be in the situation of constant collapse and constant catastrophe. We looked at the parental environment that we're all dealing with and the multiple factors that we all have to cope with. Then we looked a little bit about the importance of looking after ourselves, very briefly, which needs more time, but looking after ourselves and recognizing that when we are maxed out, as we probably all are at the moment, maybe we need help, or maybe we need to look after ourselves a little bit more. And that's not being selfish, on the contrary. We have to look after ourselves to enable us to maintain and look after others. Torah says, then we look very briefly at a strategy for managing anger. So we are, as I say, this prayer is really beautiful, and I think it's so important. The wisdom to know the difference between that which I can change and which I can't. I've raised a question. So what is our role as parents? If we look back on this time, please God, soon, we say to ourselves, what is my predominant role as a parent in this current situation? What do I need to give my children? What do I need to expect from my children? And then we talked about very briefly a 3-step emergency process for trying to help anger. Let me finish with a positive. It's so important that when we have those moments, we maximize the positive and the bonding moments. And I'm going to say, and that really, if we're getting it right, 65 to 70% of the time, we're doing a very good job in the circumstances. In other words, if essentially I'm managing to maintain calm and I'm managing to maintain equilibrium, 65 to 70% of the time, 6.5 out of 10 reactions or 7 out of 10 reactions, which we'll be aiming for, I would say that at the moment we're doing very well. We're doing very well. Now, maybe not all of us are managing that. And there are times when we're not managing that. And then maybe we need some more strategies or some more assistance to do that. And to ask ourselves the question that I've been asking. Am I setting the bar too high? Are the expectations realistic? Maybe some of the reasons for the tensions are actually because the expectations are not realistic. And that's important. I want to finish with a positive. I promised at the beginning I wouldn't do any of the kind of philosophizing that was part of lockdown 1. But I would like to share with you one story, which I very, very much believe in. And that is a story which I found to be an inspirational story. I actually met, I've only made one trip to South Africa. We've got a few South Africans in the class. One trip to South Africa. That was 19 years ago, and believe it or not, I was only there for 3 days, from Thursday to a Monday. The reason why I was only there for 3 days is because it was about 3 or 4 weeks after the birth of our first child. I wanted to get back to enjoy those early weeks of fatherhood. But I met a man there called Simi Lager, L-A-G-R, but his name is Simi Lager. And we struck up a real friendship over those 3 days. I was there for a seminar, and he sent me a beautiful story of someone that he knew called Micha Pinkas. That was a good friend of his. And I've kept it for the last 18, 19 years in my file of beautiful stories. And it is about attitude. And where we can, and I want to stress that, where we can to maximize the positive and the bonding moments. Where we can, because it's unrealistic for all of us, for any of us, to remain positive all of the time. It's just not realistic. But where we can choose to be positive, where we can choose to look at the situation positively, then let's maximize those moments. And here's the episode. Micha Pinchas was a chemical engineer, and Simi describes him as the type of person you love to hate. He was always in a good mood. In fact, he had a trademark slogan. When you asked him how he was, he would say, "If I was any better, I'd be twins." It was a trademark slogan. And Micha and Simi writes, it was quite irritating sometimes. You know, when you're not feeling in a great mood, there's nothing more irritating than people around you in a great mood. When you want to be morose and you want to be a little bit down and moan about the weather, and you've got positive people around you, they're very frustrating. He worked in he was a chemical engineer, worked in a project with 11,000 employees. He himself wore a kippah under his hard hat, and every Friday he would get people together for a Shabbat meal, and he even had a minyan every so often, known as his shtiebel. And eventually, Simi once said to him, how do you do it? How is it you're always positive, always bouncing around? Micha said to him, look, I believe firmly that we can't always choose the circumstances we face, but we can choose how we face the circumstances. And I believe we have a choice if we choose positively or negatively. He says, and my philosophy is I always want to choose positive. They lost contact, and Simi heard that Micha, unfortunately, was involved in a very, very serious accident. He fell 15 meters from a distillation column. In fact, he ended up with 16 hours of surgery, many weeks in intensive care, and when he left hospital in those days, he actually had rods protruding from his back. When Micha met him sometime later, and said to him 6 months after the accident, after he'd been released from hospital, he said to him, how are you? And Micha said to him, fine, if I was any better, I'd be twins. And Simi said to him, how did you manage? How did you handle a situation like that? Micha explained that when he fell from the column, he was still conscious. And the paramedics rushed round and started giving him treatment and getting him to hospital. And even though they were treating him, he could see in their face that they were not positive. They were not positive. And Micha felt that he had to somehow or other change their paradigm and change their mindset, even in this devastating situation. So there was a nurse that was firing questions at him. And suddenly she said to him, are you allergic to anything? And he said, in as loud a voice as he could, yes. Immediately, all the paramedics stopped doing what they were doing. And they said, what are you allergic to? And he said to them, I'm allergic to heights. And then he said to them, treat me like a man who's choosing to live, not like a man who's going to die. Incredible story. Incredible story. And again, I'm not suggesting that we can all be positive all of the time. What I am suggesting is where we can maximize the positive, we should. When there are bonding moments at the home, whether they're 5 minutes or a Friday night or whatever it is, we should. Because those bonding moments, those positive moments are really, really, really important. They're really the cement that holds everything else together. And even in those moments which are fragmented, or even those moments which are fractious, nonetheless, those bonding moments are what holds the cement together. So I'm going to stop here. I've spoken for 45 minutes. I'm going to stop here. I'm going to come off screen share and open it out to the floor. Next week, we're going to look at what are realistic expectations. Thoughts, questions, please. You can unmute yourselves or send me something on chat. Anybody got any thoughts or expectations? Thoughts, questions?
Rabbi Herman, I've got
Yes.
something you might address next week. We've got I don't know what age you're addressing, but we've got a new university student who went away in September, and all of a sudden he's back to living with mum and dad and siblings under one roof, and that's presented quite a challenge. How do you step back and let him do the sorts of things he would do at university, which is sleeping most of the day, and not for us to feel frustrated and keep him having that independence under our roof? So it's a strange situation.
Okay, so we are going to address that more next week, and I'm going to try and give some kind of formula for what are realistic expectations. But for the moment, I would say what's really important is to ask yourself cost versus benefit analysis. That's a very simple formula. In other words, am I going to win this one or not win this one? Right. I mean, also next week, I mean, some of you have been on my 3-part parenting course. Donna, you could probably give it now yourself, but having hosted it at least twice, I think. But in that particular course, which I will refer to a little bit next week, we talk about how to negotiate, if you like, and how to encourage buy-in. And the bottom line is, for a teenager, we have to have buy-in. There has to be buy-in. So rather than making demands, we've got to work with them to create some type of buy-in. So in short, I'm saying 2 things. Number one is that we've got to ask ourselves, am I going to win or am I going to lose? What's going to be the cost-benefit analysis? And the ultimate, how can I put it? The ultimate goal that we're looking for is to maintain the relationship. So a cost-benefit analysis in terms of relationship. What is this going to do with the relationship? So, and next we're going to talk about that a little bit, extract from the parenting course, about how to balance that and how to know when it's worthwhile making that withdrawal from the relationship bank, and when actually it's not worthwhile and the cost is going to be too much. The other factor is, as I say, how can I talk to my teenager so that they buy in? When teenagers buy in, they take ownership. When it's imposed on teenagers, they resist. I have this phrase, the more we insist, the more they resist. But the more we can create buy-in and negotiate buy-in, the more likely it is that they'll take responsibility. So those are kind of the heads up for what's coming next. Can you survive the week ahead on that one? Okay, I think there are a couple of questions on chat here. Let's have a look. Okay. Oh, sorry, 1 second. Okay. So you didn't hear the end of what I said there? Oh, if I was any better, I'd be twins. That was the motif of the story. Okay. So is it always a matter of negotiation, and is bribery acceptable? So we don't like to use the word bribery. We prefer to use the word incentive. Incentive rather than bribery. Of course, there are times when incentives are not only acceptable, but they are vital. And in unprecedented times, we're going to have to use those more often than we would do normally. So I can't give you an exact formula for that because it depends on so many variables, but there is no question, and I'm just looking to make sure my door is closed here. I have used incentives, what can I say, much more frequently than I normally would to encourage a child to work, to apply themselves, to help out, whatever it is, much more frequently than I normally would. By the way, incentives are a scaffolding. It's a very important point, this. Because scaffolding is about building a building, but also we know that the scaffolding must come down at some stage. So whilst you put up the scaffolding, you're supposed to build the building behind. And that's a very important point, by which I mean as follows. In terms of incentives, that means that yes, I've incentivized my child to do something, but once they have done it, then I'll be saying to them, you did that so well, you really took responsibility. I love the way that you handled that. So I need to build the building behind. If it's just a question of the incentive alone, without the building behind, then that's negative, and that leads them to become dependent on the incentive only. But ultimately, I'm simply using the incentive as scaffolding to build the building behind. So the answer is yes, incentives are relevant, and they've got to be used more frequently in the current circumstances. They can't be used the whole time, of course they can't, because otherwise it's going to cost a fortune, and they're going to lose their meaning. But they do need to be used more often, and that's a perfect example of how we have to have realistic expectations of ourselves and our children's parents. And some children need more incentives, less incentives. That's important. But as I say, what's most important is remember to build the child behind the scaffolding. That's really important, because the ultimate incentive should be that sense of achievement and that sense of success that I've managed to handle this well. Let's have a look at a couple of other questions over here. Can you have details of the parenting course? So I'm going to give you an email address. In fact, I'm going to put it on chat. An email address. We don't have, sorry, 1 second, to everyone. This is ros@c.uk.net. If you send an email to Ros, then she will give you details of, well, if there's enough interest, then we will schedule a parenting course. If there's enough interest, we'll schedule a 3-part parenting course. And Ros will also give you the details of how to access the WhatsApp message. Okay, let me just see if there's any other. What about the kids when the kids are arguing between themselves and trying not to take sides and keep everything calm? Okay, when kids are arguing amongst themselves and you are trying to keep everyone calm. So again, this is really, obviously siblings do argue. That is natural, and that is part of life, and it's once recognized and it's natural. So in terms of helping them manage, it's one of those questions where it's quite difficult to answer specifically, because but I'm going to give some principles. So obviously, in terms of, by the way, and I should have said this, one of the very, very best ways is role modeling. Role modeling. If our children see how we role model our frustrations, then that is the absolute best teacher. And then there are a number of, I'm going to use this question to bring out some principles in terms of this. So we have to ask ourselves, where are the flashpoints? What creates the flashpoints? And very often, and then there's a kind of combination of understanding those flashpoints is really important. So for example, it may be that there's a certain degree of sibling rivalry. It may be that one child is finding life particularly frustrating at that moment. Maybe there's a child who's actually getting on with life and the other one is not. So we have to always ask ourselves, when a child is expressing anger, what is the underlying trigger of that anger? So tonight I've tried to identify the underlying triggers for us as parents, many of which are understandable, right? Even though it's our responsibility to try and handle that anger, many of which make an environment which makes the world challenging. So what is the underlying triggers? And we have to have a combination of what the Torah calls the right hand that brings near and the left hand the right hand expresses love and the left hand expresses discipline. In terms of love, we need to empathize. We need to understand. We need to do that at times when they can listen, and which means when it's not emotionally irrelevant and non-contentious times. These are all things that we address in our course. How to talk to a child in non-contentious times. It's no good when they're angry; they're not in a place to listen. And then we need to talk to them about some of the strategies that we employ as adults to help us recognize anger, help us control anger. And really, we need to do that for both sides. I would say that certainly, and in the main, this is talking about teenagers. We want to try and encourage them to find ways of, I can't think of the right words, mediating if you like, and sorting it out themselves as much as possible. Sometimes we can act as a mediator to do that. But we're trying to teach them life skills in every situation. As a parent, we're a teacher of life skills. By the way, I should say, Rabbi and Dove, we're more than happy for your contributions over here. As an experienced expert colleague, please feel free to come in on anything I say or to add. But these are really, so what I'm saying is, what is triggering their anger? You must understand, first seek to understand before we can ask to be understood. Very important. First seek to understand before we can ask to be understood. What is triggering their anger? Give them proper empathy for that. Help them find some strategies to cope with that. Strategies that we ourselves are employing and we ourselves are role modeling. And then together as a group sometimes, we may need to sit down and discuss better ways of handling things. Conflict resolution is what I was looking for. Better ways of handling things between them and some give and take. So that is the kind of heads up, the type of thing that we need to do in general when there is that type of situation, which there is part of everyday life. Okay, 1 second. Any other questions? Okay, in terms of realistic expectations, how does this work with very important issues such as a child's Torah learning or davening, Kurdish Zoom lessons? Okay, that is a very good question. So again, it's not a question I can answer specifically because it's going to depend on many factors that I don't know in terms of the question. I can only use a question to give some guiding principles. So first of all, when it comes to our Judaism, we've got to try. So here are the factors to consider. How is my child doing generally in their Jewish identity? What is the family giving them? That's two important things to consider. If on the whole they're doing well, and if on the whole they are responding, cooperative, engaged, then it may well be that I have to take an easier approach to the fact that they can't study on Zoom, or at the moment they're not finding to fill out davening prayer easy. So it's going to depend on that factor. That's important. Generally speaking, it's vital that Judaism does not become a battleground. And many teenagers, we're focusing on teenagers here, many teenagers will go through something of an oscillation in terms of their relationship with Judaism. And that is natural. And we have got to ensure that we don't make Judaism a battleground. So certainly if generally their Judaism is pretty strong and they're struggling at school with it, I would go easy on the school front. If it's not that strong, then forcing them to attend school lessons is not going to help. We have to look at other strategies to help. The most important factor, believe it or not, is actually the relationship. The relationship they have with you as parents is the most important factor. Believe it or not, it's the most important factor in their Judaism too. Because children tend, if the relationship is strong, children tend to want to meet their parents' hopes and dreams and aspirations. If, God forbid, the relationship is not strong, then children will use anything to hit back at parents. Now, those are very, very terse sentences, and I feel quite uncomfortable sharing them without giving it more of a context, because what I want from these sessions is you go away feeling empowered, not emasculated. So that's very important. So, and so much more that could be said about that. So, and I'm not going to give a whole parenting series now. It's impossible. But what I will say is the relationship is very, very important, even in terms of their Judaism. And here's a very important factor. It's never, ever, ever too late to improve the relationship. Assuming we're talking about a normative everyday parenting relationship, which is my area of speciality, as opposed to, God forbid, an abusive relationship, which is beyond everyday parenting, it's never too late to improve the relationship. And every child wants it. Doesn't matter how old they are, every child wants that improved relationship. So if you feel the relationship is not that strong, that's the place to start. So don't make Judaism a battleground. Have realistic expectations of your children, work on the relationship, make Judaism light in the house and fun in the house. Don't make it intensive or difficult or onerous in the house. That's important. And then if we as parents feel a sense of love towards our Judaism with those other factors, and that's the most important factor. But recognize that children will oscillate in their relationship with it, but if we handle it well and in a wholesome way, then there's every chance that the children will come through that oscillation on the side that we are hoping for. And of course, it goes without saying, we always have to daven, we always have to ask Hashem himself for that divine assistance. I'm going to take another 5 minutes of questions and then we're going to close. If there are any more, let me just see. Oh, okay. Some doesn't respond even to small requests like cleaning teeth or putting socks on unless we start to raise our voice. What do you suggest when every battle is essentially for us to win? Again, I actually feel that question probably needs more detail for me to give it any realistic answer. I don't know the age of the young man.
Hi, that was us. Every minor small thing is a major battle. You will tell my son isn't quite teenage yet, but he's worse than my teenager. You tell him to do something and he won't do it. He'll ignore you. You tell him several times and he won't do it. He'll ignore you. Then he'll go and find something else to do. And you'll tell him and you'll tell him and you'll tell him. And it might be like, put your shoes on, we're leaving the house. Or it might be like, clean your teeth. Or it might be get into your bed. Or it might be turn your lessons on. Every single thing is something he has to do. We can't just say, well, never mind that battle, we'll lose that battle. It's every minor aspect of his life. Wash your hands,
Okay, so
put your sock on. And he's nearly 11.
I think, again, thank you for giving me the details, but I still feel it needs probably a broader conversation, which although I am quite time constrained, I would be happy to have. If you want to email Roz, then I just don't feel I can do it justice. I need to ask you many more questions to get a better analysis, and I don't think those questions are for the public forum. So,
Okay. All right, thank you.
If you want to, I'm no good at long email correspondences because I speak faster than I type. And as I say, I am quite time constrained. But if you'd like to touch base with Roz, then we can try and put something in the diary.
Okay, thanks.
Apart from health, what's the most important thing we can hope our kids come out with at this period? Well, that's a great question, which Donna asked. So I would say, first of all, obviously health, I'm going to say, incorporates emotional well-being. Health must incorporate emotional well-being, that they maintain a sense of balance, and that they that is the absolute bottom line. That means physical health and emotional well-being. Those two things go together, and that has got to be our absolute priority, and that's got to be prioritized even over work, even over school work, because it's no good if they get their GCSEs, but God forbid their emotional stability is, God forbid, undermined in the process. Yeah, it's a hard thing to say, but one can catch up with him with GCSEs. It's harder to put right emotional stability. So I would say we've got to be very, very, what's the word? We've got to, emotional well-being is the most important thing in my view. And then I would say that ideally, here we're going for ideals, and this was easier in the first lockdown and harder in the last lockdown. Actually, let me do it in a graded way. I think that at the moment it's important that they see that we are managing, and that we're honest about the fact that it's difficult, and that we're honest about the fact that we are also finding it hard. But we personally, I'm saying that as a family we are managing, and we are doing our best to be there for each other. We're doing our best to extend ourselves to each other, and we are being understanding of each other. I think if they can look back at this period and say to themselves, you know what, as a family, we actually managed reasonably well. I think that would be a great legacy. We actually managed. We were there for each other. Yes, there were difficult moments. There were maybe even explosive moments, but we did our best to be there for each other. And our parents were there for us, and we feel that they were there for us. I think that's really, really important. There would be higher levels of achievement, which is maybe where we teach them a certain resilience. We use the opportunity to teach them a certain resilience and salute the resilience they do demonstrate. So when they do manage, when they do a piece of work, when they do handle a difficult situation, when they do handle a disappointment, we salute their resilience. That's very, very, very important. We salute their resilience and build up their resilience, because resilience is one of the greatest factors of success in life. And therefore we have to be able to salute their resilience wherever we can and look out for that positive, which is hard when we ourselves are perhaps we're working on our own resilience. But that's very, very important. If you want to take it one grade even higher, that would then be a philosophical approach, which is certainly we have tried to a philosophical approach would be to see this as divinely designated, and that this is part of life's journey, and that actually we can grow from this experience. We don't have to shrink from this experience. We can grow from this experience, grow as people, grow in our relationship with others, grow in our relationship with Hashem, look to extend ourselves to other people, to a neighbor, to a friend, to others, even phone calls to other people. That would be the ultimate. But I want to be pragmatic. That was possibly more achievable. So again, the bottom line is that we are managing as a family. We're managing. And actually we must salute ourselves and pat ourselves on the back for managing. Next level up is that and by managing I mean being there for each other, extending ourselves to each other. Next level up is a certain degree of resilience, and let's call it the highest level would be to find those moments where we can look at it as an opportunity to grow as people, grow in our relationship with Hashem, and grow in our understanding of what life is all about. Okay, I think I'm going to close here. Just check there isn't anything else that. Okay, so how to handle it if you know they lie to you. Okay, I am going to, okay, again, it's one of those questions that's quite difficult without knowing more about the age of the child, the situations in which they lie. But I'm going to give you two principles. And then I'm going to close with this, and we'll have to leave the questions for next week. Two principles are, first of all, it's very, very important for, very, very important for us not to trap a child into lying. Sometimes we inadvertently trap a child into lying by backing them into a corner where they feel they've got no choice but to lie. I think it's important that we don't do that. So, example, let's say, for example, you know the child was up on their iPad till 3 o'clock in the morning because you happened to go out at that time and you saw their light on. Say to him, you were up till 3 o'clock, weren't you? When you know that actually the child's going to say, no, I wasn't. Now, what's happened over here? You have trapped them into lying. That's what's happened. You've trapped them into lying. And that's not good, because what you're going to say now, yes, you were, no, I wasn't, yes, you were. And then you've almost trained them. They have to defend their position. The more we insist, the more they resist. And you've inadvertently trapped them into lying. So that's the one thing one should avoid. So how we want to handle a situation like that, you might say to them, I think you were up very late last night. That's broader, and it doesn't pin them down or back them into a corner. I think, and then you have a discussion about how important sleep is, and then we can talk about how to negotiate with them to have more sleep when they're in a good place at the time when they're receptive. So you haven't trapped them into lying. There's no advantage in trapping them into lying. It's very important that we ourselves, of course, always role model truth. And it's very important that when we have opportunities to demonstrate trust, that we salute trust. Thank you. It's really good. You said you would do that. You followed it through, and that's important. Now, sometimes there may be occasions when we say to a child, actually, I feel that you have let me down, and I feel that you have, it's so important that I trust you. I'm able to trust you. You don't label the child a liar. You say, better to say, actually, a better way to say it would be, I feel let down, rather than I feel you've let me down. I feel let down. You did say you would do this, and you haven't done it. That's okay. I feel let down. You did say you would do this, and you haven't done it. Now, you're focusing more on the issue than the person, so you're not attacking them, but you are. It's important you hold them up for responsibility. And then you say, I need to be able to talk to you so we can establish a relationship which I know that you're going to follow through. Many, many times you do. This occasion you haven't, and it's important to me that you do. So I'm saying, don't trap them into lying. Role model honesty yourself. Find other ways of talking about the issue. And there are occasions when using the right language, we have to talk about, endorse trust whenever you can. There are occasions we have to talk in the right language. We have to be able to, then we may be able to talk to them about it, but without what's the word? Undermining them as a person. Okay, a couple of people have said that they liked the philosophical approach. If you are interested, I am giving a share. I'd love to give a whole share on the philosophical approach. I'm giving a share in a couple of weeks' time called Finding Strength in Vulnerability. I very much believe in a philosophical approach to this. This wasn't really the purpose of this evening, but and I feel strongly it can enhance the quality of our lives strongly. But if you're interested in that, Finding Strength and Vulnerability, again, if you email Roz, then she will give you details. I'm going to stop here. Thank you, Donna, again for organizing. Hope that you all have a good week, and thanks for listening.